Okay, I am Tayyaba Nafees, and I am a British student, PhD in cybersecurity, and that's my work, vulnerability AntiPatterns. Okay, just give me a shout if you couldn't hear me. My PhD supervised very famous people, Natalie Cole, Ian Ferguson, Adam Sampson, so you are well aware of all these. What's the problem? What we are trying to solve? Why we need vulnerability AntiPatterns? I am not cybersecurity expert, I am software engineer. Why software developers struggle with persistent software errors which they day-to-day practices faced in their practices, and that's caused and make hackers successful to lead to exploit the systems. There must be an information knowledge gap which is just prevent software developers and cybersecurity experts to address the vulnerability so they can solve the problems and make systems software and secure. And what is the best way to fill this information gap about these security problems in a format that is usable not for cybersecurity experts, for software developers? Because they are makers, they are not breakers. They learn how to make the things, but they lack the information how things are getting wrong in this movement in the cybersecurity world. So we come up with the idea, okay, for software developers, why not capture the information of vulnerabilities in understandable formats? And that's why my whole proposition based on vulnerability AntiPatterns. Actually, I'm just taking a step back and telling you why this is called vulnerability AntiPatterns. So this is combination of two basic methodologies, which first is vulnerability, which cybersecurity experts define as a weakness, and software developers called as mistake, error, development, insecurities, and security flaws. And AntiPattern is very basic terminology used in software engineering, which is derived from design patterns. But rather than telling you how things get right, AntiPattern tell you how things get wronged. For example, which level of software development processes you are making mistakes, and that leads to vulnerability. So AntiPatterns basically capture the poor software development practices, which is inappropriate solutions, or the problem coming when you are applying a solution in a wrong context. And then what we are doing is we just used all the cybersecurity wealth of knowledge in the form of vulnerability databases and the patterns provided by cybersecurity experts, and tried to provision that knowledge in the form of AntiPatterns and design a new pattern-based methodology, which we called vulnerability AntiPatterns. Definition of vulnerability AntiPatterns. For me, we proposed a definition. Vulnerability AntiPattern is a solution of problematic cybersecurity problems that leads, or development errors that leads to vulnerability. Not only telling you this is the problem, it is also telling you how to mitigate this problem, which comes in the form of AntiPattern. So actually, vulnerability AntiPattern comprised of AntiPattern, how things get wrong, or what is software development error, how this leads to vulnerability, and then provide a pattern against this pattern as a solution, how to mitigate this vulnerability. So this work is only focused, I know this is a bit busy, but this is for software developers. Because cybersecurity experts knows how things get wrong. But how to fix this one, this is very important to transfer the knowledge, which is important to learn software developers how to start making things secure from the start. And then we are design the knowledge in the AntiPatterns, what is vulnerability, what is the security risk patterns in the form of vulnerability footprints, and in the form of solution patterns, we provide solutions at different stages of software development lifecycle, and then incorporate in the form of mitigation plans and give you the examples of real world and how they patch their problems as well. So main objective of vulnerability AntiPattern is use pattern-based approach to raise awareness of those software development errors that leads to vulnerabilities among software developers, And then this will bridge the knowledge gap between the cybersecurity experts and software developers in usable and understandable formats. So I'm talking about vulnerability anti-patterns. Okay, let me take you the example for explaining in more detail how vulnerability anti-patterns deal with vulnerabilities and then how it's take you in the form of pattern as a solution. So for example, I'm giving you the very famous example, SQL injection. So these vulnerability patterns can be used for any vulnerability and just design a vulnerability anti-pattern. This is a systematic approach. You can recurrent problems you can use anytime for any vulnerability. SQL injection. Vulnerability is SQL injection. Vulnerability anti-pattern is how things SQL injection anti-patterns, and the solution is sanitize untrusted input patterns. And against, like I'm telling you, SQL injections, you know what is an SQL injection. What does software developers say SQL injection? What is their perspective about these SQL injections vulnerabilities and how they deal with this problem? So then it comes under the umbrella of this is vulnerabilities, this is how software developers known this vulnerability, and this is how cybersecurity community known this vulnerability. Then what is the footprints or risk factors or risk patterns which leads this vulnerability during the software development lifecycle? And then the solution in the form of patterns and security patterns proposed by both communities. So first, I'm going to take you the anti-pattern of SQL injection. So it is also known improper neutralization of special element used in SQL command. Okay, very, very academic thing. What do you think, which software development lifecycle is responsible if you missed opportunity to don't look after this vulnerability or error? So mostly this vulnerability arises due to reason when you don't make sure during your designing phase of software development lifecycle, miss the opportunity to design a secure systems or secure design. And then we are mapping with these are open source vulnerability databases, all are well aware, CWE. And then they actually, the problem we are just faced during whole this process is, for these databases, these are numbers. But these numbers don't mean anything for software developers. When they need to know and learn how things get wrong, okay, CWE-89. Okay, what next? How to solve this problem? Then generally known as SQL injection. There are examples, tons of examples in CVE you can find. And these are related anti-patterns. So I'm not telling you what is wrong. At this point, we are just informing you how cybersecurity deal with SQL injection. Okay, there are some interlinked vulnerability with this vulnerability as well. Okay, careful. So there are a list of CWE's vulnerabilities, improper neutralization of special element and LDA queries, SQL injection, hibernate, authorization bypass through query primary key bypass, and dangling database cursor. These vulnerabilities are interlinked on the SQL injection. So these are clusters of the vulnerabilities for giving more insight of information how things get wronged. Okay, so far very technical stuff, how cybersecurity experts are saying what is vulnerability, how SQL injection known as, what is ID, what is their related vulnerabilities, and example so far done. Developers need an example. They want to learn how things get wronged, how software developers design things and test things, and how ethical hackers break things. This needs to be learned or just give an insight to the software developer as well to know about how things get wrong. For example, in ideal case, software developer design a software, take a username and password, test, put the username, put the password, okay, valid or invalid, authorized or unauthorized, fine. No problem so far. Ethical hacker. Special characters. Don't need to put any username or anything. Put the special character, click, bang on. Come on. They got the information from the database. And do you think software developers mostly think about when they are doing testing this? If they have penetration testers in their team and company is quite mature enough considering the security, yes, then they are considering. But normal software developers in their general practices, how much they are aware about these practices? Okay, problem, got the example, things getting wrong. What is the main top level problems which to deal this problem? So we are saying, okay, there's a problem, lack of input validation, lack of intercepting filters, pre-processing, post-processing of commands and queries. But what are the typical causes for the software developers for dealing this problem? So they are saying, okay, they are not following secure coding practices, but what are the secure coding practices? And then lack of input validation when they are developing a systems. So these are actually unbalancing forces which software developers in their day-to-day practices, they struggle with these things. And there are so this is our created scenario, but CAP give you a real-time attack patterns to see how other things get wrong in more further scenarios and interlink vulnerabilities. So this is only the AntiPattern, which is telling you how things get wrong from the small cybersecurity experts databases, provided databases, till the end, how software developers lacking what the information they need to update to know about this AntiPattern. Okay, problem, solution. We need a pattern for capture this problem. We named, there are so many different names, funny names you can, like washing your stocking, and we are saying sanitize untrusted input pattern. Okay, this pattern is, we are using typical pattern, design pattern approach for writing this pattern. What is context, what is the problem, what is the risk pattern, how to solve this problem. This is very detailed information. For example, context, SQL injection, AntiPattern is our main context, which I already presented. Then the problem, okay, correctly, this is the problem, you are not escaping special characters when you are generating your queries and command, SQL injections. Risk patterns, there are list of risk patterns related to this SQL injection, but I can't put all information. So these patterns contains tons of information in detail. So I just select the top one. For example, no sanitization of input data, no separation of data and code, just dynamically generate your queries, and all these sources leads to untrusted input pattern. For solving these problems, we dig into more for finding that we called, this is called software fault patterns. So definition provided by NIST is software fault pattern is called faulty computation, and they do the formalization over the CWEs for providing the clusters of different vulnerabilities and put together in the same category, so we can find a recurrent vulnerabilities and find the recurrent solution against them. So the main cluster for the SQL injection is tainted input. But the problem then further divide into the secondary cluster, which they called is tainted input to the command. But there is other related vulnerabilities for the tainted input, that is shell, other input text, formats, contexts. These are problems. Now we are going to the mitigation patterns. How to solve these problems? So for mitigating, we are looking for the mitigation pattern, and first pattern we are called sanitize external input. This pattern further explanation how you can sanitize your external input or any input which is you are passing during your query generation. And in detail, this is subdivided. So first of all, we are just mapping into the software development lifecycle phases which you need to take care while you are doing or writing your code or developing any software system which is generating a queries or using database and there is a communication. So in design phase, first of all, there is a ton of information which I just wrote. So to validate the data supplied from any form-based, any query, XML content, use voided libraries or frameworks, for example, persistence layers, Hibernate, some source provide enterprise Java beans. Then the implementation phase, you have to be pluggable, filters, approaches, sanitization of query, arguments, and all these things. You notice this thing, while we are proposing information here, these are language dependent, these are platform dependent, some are clusters due to other information related, might be software developers don't have those resources. So refactor solutions further divided into technology-based patterns. What are software patterns for solve these problems? What are processes patterns to solve these problems? For example, in technology patterns, Java regular expressions, but this is again limitized according to the programming language. For software patterns, you can just use intercepting filter patterns, which is very famous design patterns, but how many people are using these patterns for solving this problem? And then processes patterns is just like dynamic facilitation to intercept, scrub, or validate your data for passing or generating your queries. Then we are, in our patterns, we provide very detailed example of the most recent CWE vulnerability, and then CVE vulnerability related to this one, what patch they provide, how they solve this problem, and what are the solutions you can use in your specific scenario. And then the mitigation patterns also include the related security patterns, which software developers can easily use during their practices while using, for example, security patterns related to SQL injection is message, interceptor gateway, intercepting validators. There are multiple or like minimum against each vulnerability. You can easily find minimum 5 to 10 security patterns, but it's depend on your need and how you're going to be used and how well you are aware to use these patterns. So in conclusion, so far I considered during my PhD, I did, only OWASP top 10 software vulnerabilities. But when we just dig more into the vulnerabilities, we realized against only 10 vulnerabilities, we created 23 patterns. Because these vulnerability sums are clusters of language dependent, like only comes in C and C++. These are C# vulnerabilities. Some are only platform dependent. Some are just like which platform you are using, it's depend. This is come on there. Okay, so we have now catalog of vulnerabilities, AntiPatterns. And why I'm here, so we are looking, this is a reminder. I'm here for looking the cooperation and partnership for designing these patterns to educate software developers and use these patterns and provide software developers training about these vulnerabilities, and then develop a tool based on AntiPatterns to provide software developers 24/7 support so they can develop secure software systems. That's me. Thank you.